Just when you thought it was safe to go back into the internet streets, I am DJ Hardcore Prime, and this is the Killer Bee Effect.
I am the Magi Commander, and it's time for me to talk to Mr. Calloway. Mr. Calloway, I've heard you talk about Queen Mother Harriet Tubman didn't exist even though she has history here in Canada. Nat Turner didn't exist, the slave ships didn't exist, even though Questlove's great-great-grandparents was on the Clotilda. Yo, it's time for us to talk, bro.
Osio, brothers and sisters, relatives and freethinkers, let's begin this segment with asking a multiple choice question. What is Africa's original name? Is it A, Africa, B, Europe, C, Alkebulan, or D, Ethiopia?
Aside from this question being far irrelevant, what's the point of what the ancient Africans call themselves? Which I will prove that Africa has an African root. However, we cannot say the same about the word indigenous and aboriginal. These words that you and your followers use to identify yourself are in fact of European origin. Observe, where did the word aboriginal come from? To break down the difference between using aboriginal instead of indigenous peoples, let's look at the etymology and see where the words we use come from. As stated in an article posted by the CBC in 2014, the word aboriginal is not only an English word, but it also has a curious etymological backstory. The ab in aboriginal is a Latin prefix that means away from or not. So in that sense, aboriginal can actually mean not original. This is not exactly what we're trying to convey with this term. Furthermore, by using one English word, aboriginal, to describe a large and diverse group of people, we're not fully recognizing the diversity within the indigenous community in Canada. Let me stop right here, because we'll have some African Americans that'll say that Canada is irrelevant. But see, I made the point on Brandon's show that you have Native Americans in Canada and you have Native Americans in South America, not to mention that you have some here. The funny thing is, the ones in Canada and the ones in South America look exactly the same. Now it's the African American who's now claiming to be the indigenous Native American, and the indigenous Native American are now the Mongoloids, despite them having the same phenotype from both sides of the Americas. Later in this video, I will prove where the African American cannot be connected significantly to those who came before Cristobal Colon, aka Columbus. Let's get back to the article. Aboriginals have been an umbrella term used by Canadians and Canadian institutions for convenience. It's used to categorize indigenous peoples from across Canada as one big homogeneous group. Aboriginal is an oversimplification that hides more meaning than it conveys. Just as one province differs from the next province, indigenous people and communities vary dramatically from coast to coast to coast in regards to culture, language, and tradition. Rather than rely on the languages of the past, we Animaki choose to follow international standards and replace the word aboriginal with indigenous. We think this phrase is better aligned with the experiences and understanding of indigenous peoples in Canada, as well as the international community. Okay, before we get to our next word, ladies and gentlemen, let me first express how we destroyed Dane's argument. The Animaki, an indigenous nation, stated in the article that I read from the official website that they were fine with the term indigenous. But as you will see, not every nation agrees with either term. Also, the Animaki stated that the cultures and languages such as theirs varies from coast to coast to coast. Now, wouldn't this also ring true for Africa? Most modern Africans are proud to accept the term Africa and African, starting with the African Union, the African National Congress, also called the ANC of South Africa, Pan-African Congress, 1900 to 1945.
Now, one person in that Pan-African community is doing research right now. As a matter of fact, pan-Africanism started in 1955. 1955.
But now, let's tackle the word indigenous. Now, this next article is an editorial named Aborigine, Indian, Indigenous, or First Nations by Michael A. Peters and Carl T. Micah or Mika. This was published February 17, 2017, and it states, there has been oppositions by various tribal groups and First Nation peoples to the term indigenous and aborigines and its cognates. Although governments around the world continue to use both terms, increasingly the favorite term is First Nations, though this term is increasingly used in legal discourse, especially in Canada, to refer to members of legal recognized reserved communities. Accordingly, some scholars have argued that the collective noun used to name the world's tribal groups have been increasingly problematic, and that at source the term has been derogatory, historically inaccurate, and contaminated by a colonial past based on the demeaning notion of primitive people with its assumption of westernized cognitive superiority. One example is the collection noun Meri, introduced according to Ringenhau 1992 to destroy the heterogeneity of the indigenous tribes of New Zealand. Most indigenous people prefer to be named or referred to by their specific nation or tribe name, which themselves are sometimes contentious. It has been noted that the term indigenous or aborigine is not itself indigenous. So what I want to do now is introduce you to the inventors of indigenous. The term indigenous derives from the late Latin indigenus and indigena, native, and from the old Latin indu that derives from the archaic indu, a cognate of the Greek indu, meaning in, within, and the Latin gigera, meaning to beget, from the root gene, meaning to produce, give birth, beget. Indigena in Latin means native, used of plants, animals, people who come from a particular region. It was first used in the 1640s when it was applied to plants and culture in the New World. The general senses of the term applied to the produced, growing, living, or occurring naturally in a particular region or environment. Also, sometimes used as a pseudonym for native, innate, aborigine, endemic, and self-born. There's a strong sense of replication in the term, with the evolution of the indigenous group being self-derived. An indigenous perception, there could quite likely be a fit between the linguistics label for the group, who, according to the term, has a tendency to rampantly self-populate, and the genocidal tool historically used to stop them from self-populating, or currently attempt to understand them through collecting their genetic material. DNA. See, for instance, Gardner, 1999. Moreover, their tie through the term to the natural world sits well with the racist belief that these populations are more basic, unreliable, and generally barbaric. The word indigenous was first used officially in the United Nations in 2002 in its political declaration of the World Summit on Sustainable Development. Prior to this time, the term was regarded as still under debate for use in the UN official documents. So once again, we look at the word aborigine. The word aborigine falls also in the same family of terms, but is often used in relation to the Australian and the Canadian tribal peoples. The same problem also accompanies the term Indian when used in American and Canadian tribal peoples. In this case, the term springs from an older use when, before Christopher Columbus, the word India and Indies was used to label the entire Asian subcontinent. Later, it was applied and qualified as American Indian. The word Maori, while in use before 1815, did not appear in writing until 1850. Now, before we leave the word Aborigine, I would like to add a side note. The Australian so-called Aborigine, who, like the African American, those of the Caribbean, and the Africans of Africa, have one word in common when it comes to the racist European, and that's N-I-G-G-E-R. But the so-called indigenous Niji, I'll deal with that word, African American likes to use them as an example for the glorification of the word Aboriginal or Aborigine. me, but they, the Australians, him or herself, find it very derogatory and offensive. They prefer to call themselves the black
What do
fellas.
Aboriginal people think of African black people?
Oh, they love them.
Yeah?
Yes,
Tell them.
absolutely. We love the Africans up here.
Same color. Same color. I like that.
Real good.
Yeah?
Yeah. We love all the African people.
Yes?
Yeah. Same blood and same colors. Same blood and same colors. Same blood and same colors.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I like that.
They are so open,
Yeah.
and they are not afraid to speak their mind.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, yeah.
They open up to themselves. They and they learn a bit about our culture. And,
Yeah.
and we learn a bit about them.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's good.
So when you see someone like me, are you what goes through your mind?
Countrymen are, we all the same.
We're all the same.
I feel like you're our brothers and sisters.
So we still one people.
Let's move on.
Now, let's dive into the answer of this question a little bit deeper. There may be some of you who may feel as though your history teacher gave you the correct answer. Or it may be a few of you who feels as though some community leader gave you the best answer. Or there may be a small group who feel as though just because someone mentions it to them and it sounded about right, that it's a fact, meaning you approve his or her message. But the funny thing about approving someone's message is merely based upon how much you value that individual's opinion. I mean, think about it. Since history was written with maliciously biased motives and agendas in the first place, what makes a person actually buy into a stranger's opinion about their people's story?
Well, that's a great question, Mr. Calloway. You as a stranger, who has approved your message academically? Considering that you have numerous people over the years, foreign and domestic, that have tackled this subject, the name of Africa in particular, thus putting the name in proper context, somehow you see fit to revise their work without laying out your evidence, so-called, no sources, and very incorrect information. My friend, that proves that your knowledge on Africa as well as the history of America we call pseudo, little buddy. Mr. Calloway, can you provide us a peer-reviewed work of your findings? As researchers and historians, it is our duty to lay out clear facts, evidence to back up these supposed new facts. As it is in the court of law, the works are to be weighed against the previous facts or opposing facts, thus ending with an academic conclusion by a group of credible scholars. Now, if you're unable to provide this for your claims and works, Mr. Calloway, you are the very pseudo, sounds about right, individual that you just explained. But by all means, please, Mr. Calloway, carry on.
According to what public school teachers are instructed to teach our children, is that the landmass known as Africa has historically been referred to as Africa, and that the term Africa originated from the Roman word Tunisia. However, Tunisia is in fact a Roman word for Africa, but that does not mean that the term Africa itself originated from the Roman language. In fact, there is no supporting evidence nor any ancient form of historical documentation that clearly identifies its origin.
Mr. Calloway, it's Tunisia, and it was called Afrika in the early centuries of the Islamic period. That name, in turn, comes from the Roman word Africa, and named also by the Romans to their first African colony following the Punic Wars against the Carthaginians in 264-146 BCE. And that was according to the Britannica, as far as a simple search on Google. Now, let's dive a little deeper into the word Africa and where it actually comes from.
Africa. Okay, so Europe was a mess. Thankfully, Africa is really nice and is going to give us a straightforward answer. So, thanks, Africa. The Greeks actually called Africa Libya, after a Berber tribe that lived west of Egypt. But after the Romans wrecked Carthage in the Punic Wars and then covered the land in salt so nothing would ever grow there again, which is pretty messed up. Like, who even thinks about that? Salt is for food. Anyway, after that they turned this region into the province of Africa. It seems that when the Romans landed here, they met a local Berber group called the Ifri. The Ifri seem to have lived around here in caves near the ancient city of Carthage. The Berber historian Ibn Khaldun said that the Berber word Ifri means a cave. and the same word can still be found in the name of the city of Ifrane in Morocco, and in the names of the Berber tribe known as the Banu Ifran. Ifri became Afri in Latin, and the Romans just started using Afar as a general name for people from Africa. The name Libya fell out of use, and Africa Terra, the land of the Afri, took over. As more of Africa was mapped, the name extended to the whole continent.
Making the root word of Africa your favorite phrase, Mr. Calloway, indigenous.
But Tunisia has always been a northern country bordering the Mediterranean Sea and the Sahara Desert.
I think you mean Tunisia and Sahara, sir. You're wrong, but go on.
While the term Africa went from being rumored as the name of a small area originally known as the Kingdom of Tunisia, then somehow managed to streamline its way into European folktales as the commonly used name of the entire landmass south of the Mediterranean Sea. What's very important to note here is that the people of what is known now as the continent of Africa speaks many different languages and bears multiple different cultures. So logically speaking, these different cultures and different languages would carry over from generation to generation historically, in which that fact alone should make you ask the question, so which of these multiple languages did the term Africa originate from, respectively?
Again, the root word is Ifri, coming back from the Roman Afar, we going back to the indigenous Ifri. That's Tatawan. That is a Berber language, Mr. Calloway. That means cave or cave dweller.
Let's go over some commonly used theories first. One theory is that the term Africa originated from some random Roman leader named Publius Cornelius Scipio, who was said to have led the charge during the so-called Punic Wars with capturing Carthage, a landmass which later became known as North Africa.
I'm not sure how North Africa became a landmass, but this has already been debunked. I don't know about that landmass part because I know it's a part of Africa, and Africa has its own tectonic plate, so that makes it a landmass. But as far as, I don't have any reference for Publius, but the war between him and Hannibal the Great was called the Punic Wars, and that's how you pronounce that, Mr. Calloway.
Publius allegedly changed his name to read Publius Cornelius Scipio Africanus, with Africanus being a title for, quote, a wild beast, in which the term Africanus did not exist until it was placed in the Oxford Dictionary in 1983, claiming that it is a Latin word.
Wow.
But interesting enough, much older dictionaries of the Latin and Roman languages never carried such a word before.
Yet I'm sitting here looking at a manuscript. This is impossible. Dane, you are so pseudo, bro, that I just can't continue this video anymore. Now, the only thing I'm gonna do later on maybe is debunk all that other nonsense that you were saying in order to try to free these people from your nonsense. It's a Nietzsche tyranny. I can't, man. I'm sorry.
Listen, brother, black folks always want to have a conversation. What I want you to do...
I'm not black.
What I want you to do...
You know exactly who I am.
Okay, so what I want you to understand...
You put my name in the title of your videos. I see you right now.
And I use it.
You putting
So now...
He's interrupting you all the time and you let him get away with it.
One of my thumbnails and you put a...
So the internet...
What is this, some type of clown hat? You put a clown hat on top of my head?
Yes, I did. And let me tell you. Okay.
And each video that I'm watching right now is just you talking.
So the internet is not a valid source of information, but you're going to Dane, who was on the internet.
Where's your source of information? Where's your work? Where's your work?
Why are you using a video of
Where's your work?
In 1836 trying to claim...
Where's your work? Really quick. No, seriously. No, real talk. No, seriously. Where's your work?
Dang, why are you misrepresenting?
What are you doing? Like, all you're doing is just talking about other people on your channel. Where's your work?
Right. Because you're a fake historian. Hey, what tribe you from? What tribe you from?
This is not an interview. I didn't come here to get interviewed.